We begin our report with what appears to be the second assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. The suspect, 58-year-old Ryan Routh, made his first appearance in court Monday, one day after a Secret Service agent spotted him with a loaded rifle at a Trump International golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida. Routh fled the scene after the officer fired towards his location. Secret Service says the suspect did not fire a single shot. Deputies with the Martin County Sheriff's Office later arrested Routh about 50 miles from the golf course. This is body cam footage here. Officials say he did not resist arrest. The suspect is charged with one-count possession of a firearm by a convicted felon and one-count possession of a firearm with an obliterated serial number. Former President Trump was unharmed. The Trump campaign says there will be no changes to its public schedule this week. Earlier, federal authorities gave an update on the investigation, and the acting Secret Service director addressed the challenges his agency is facing.
The Secret Service's protective methodologies work, and they are sound, and we saw that yesterday. But the way we are positioned right now in this dynamic threat environment, it has given me guidance to say, you know what? We need to look at what our protective methodology is. We need to get out of a reactive model and get to a readiness model.
CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bojorquez is at the federal courthouse in West Palm Beach, Florida. Mandy, what do we learn so far about the suspect and his actions leading up to this incident and his arrest?
Yeah, this is where he faced a judge for the first time in relation to these charges, those federal gun charges. We've learned this is according to the criminal complaint attached to those charges, and this was reiterated in that news conference this afternoon, that prosecutors believe that he was in the area possibly up to 12 hours or so before he was detected by Secret Service. That's according to cell phone data they've been able to gather so far. They believe that he may have showed up around 2 in the morning on Saturday, and he wasn't spotted until about 1:30 p.m. on Sunday, when the Secret Service agent, a very alert one, saw the rifle sticking through the fence, opened fire, and that led to the suspect then taking off in his vehicle. He was later apprehended in Martin County, just north of us here, where the sheriff described his demeanor as being very emotionless. I can tell you from being inside the courtroom during the hearing today that he did seem very calm and relaxed, and at one point was even smiling with the public defender that was assigned to him. He did not seem to be fazed by the gravity of the charges that he is facing and what could still be to come, because these two charges do not necessarily have anything to do with an alleged plot. What we're understanding is that they may be a starting point for prosecutors in order to get him into jail and to keep him there as they grow their investigation and eventually hand down a superseding indictment that may contain more charges.
And apparently he's unfazed from nearly being shot. Manny, what do we know, if anything, about the changes that might happen to the Trump protection by the Secret Service in the wake of this?
Well, we did hear from the acting head of the Secret Service that he spoke with former President Trump and that they agreed that he is currently getting the highest level of security that the agency can afford. That being said, we do know that given that first attempt on the former president's life back in July, that there are enhanced security measures around him, including at rallies where they put up protective glass around the podium to try to prevent anything like what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. But we also know that the Biden administration is asking Congress now for some sort of supplemental, some more money and some more resources for Secret Service, given the kind of challenging environment that they're facing right now with as many people as they are tasked with protecting.
Manuel Bojorquez in West Palm Beach, Florida. Thank you. Shortly after the apparent assassination attempt in Florida, Donald Trump issued a statement ensuring the public he was doing fine. "Nothing will slow me down. I will never surrender," said the former president, who, unlike after the assassination attempt 2 months ago, then went on to blame the incident on what he called the, quote, rhetoric of Biden and Harris. Both the president and vice president have repeatedly denounced political violence. In response to this most recent incident, Harris released a statement saying she was disturbed by the possible assassination attempt, saying, quote, "We all must do our part to ensure that this incident does not lead to more violence." CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett joins me now. Major, let's start with the former president's remarks. He blamed it on the rhetoric of Biden and Harris. What kind of rhetoric what's he talking about?
In general, the former president is talking about Democratic rhetoric that describes the former president as a threat to democracy, that accuses him of using language from authoritarians in the past, Hitler, Mussolini. Also rhetoric that suggests he can never come back to the White House, must be stopped. All of that, the former president says, creates an atmosphere of overt hostility to the former president, which he says contributes to an atmosphere that has led to not one but two attempted assassination attempts. Democrats would counter that, pointing out when the former president uses rhetoric like poisoning the blood, he is reaching back to rhetoric of authoritarians of a different era, and that when he gives speeches questioning the results of the 2020 election that lead to a violent riot on the Capitol steps on January 6, 2021. There are reasons to question his commitment to the Constitution and democracy. The bottom line here, John, is these are efforts to politically blur what are two law enforcement realities, two attempts on the former president's life. They should be viewed as serious law enforcement events. And there should be, or there could be, a national moment to soberly assess the motives and the meaning of that. But when the former president's campaign puts out a fundraising email moments after the events of yesterday, it's hard to see that occurring.
And also, Major, help us quickly. You've covered so many Trump events. The former president, even when he was president, has himself used rhetoric that has strayed into brand new territory that has itself been characterized as being adjacent to violence or in that neighborhood. Can you help us kind of figure out the total picture here?
Not the total picture, but the internet lives forever, John, as you know, so anyone can go back and find references to violence or beating up people who are protesting at a Trump rally back in 2015 or 2016, or rhetoric in his presidency that is intolerant of anyone who opposes his agenda and suggesting things like liberate Michigan. Michigan has an active militia, let us say, collection of people, to put it mildly. Liberate Michigan had a certain meaning there. When he talks about millions upon millions, he says 20 or 21 million, numbers that have no basis in reality, of invaders coming into this country, all of them criminals. He creates a reflexive hostility to anyone seeking entry into this country, legal or otherwise. So there is plenty of rhetoric that can be described fairly as combustible, incendiary, and possibly insightful that comes from the former president. But what the president needs right now, for his campaign's sake, because he is clearly trailing the vice president, is a kind of political circuit breaker, and the events yesterday may provide exactly that.
Help me now. I'm going to one more beat on this. Springfield, Ohio. You know, the president on the former president on the one hand is drawing this causal link between what he says is rhetoric and these actions. When Democrats have tried to draw a link between what the former president has said and vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance have said about what's happening in Springfield and these bomb threats, they've said it's absurd to draw any link between the two. How do you sort all that?
The American voter is going to have to sort this out, John, but it does create quite an atmosphere of confusion. If you are going to assert, as the former president's campaign did today, that generic Democratic rhetoric about returning to the White House, democracy, Constitution, creates an atmosphere that leads to threats of violence against the former president, how can you also say and accept their assertion, which you just summarized, that bomb threats, the closure of schools, and other menacing actions in Springfield, Ohio, have nothing to do with baseless assertions that Haitian immigrants there are doing something with neighbors' pets that might be criminal or worse? You can't rationally believe what the former president and his running mates say about that, but nevertheless, they want you to. This is the confused atmosphere of rhetoric in our country right now with this presidential campaign, and acts of violence or potential acts of violence make it, and I regret to say this, even harder to sort those things out or find clarity.
Final point, Major Vice President Harris met with the Teamsters today, trying to get an endorsement. How much would it help her? But then more importantly, perhaps, how much would it hurt Harris if the Teamsters either didn't endorse her or endorse Trump since they backed Biden?
Well, if they don't endorse Harris, she could say, well, the Teamsters endorsed Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, not exactly Democratic inclinations, so take that for what it will. Right now, the Harris campaign has 9 of the 10 big unions and has very solid union support. But more importantly than that, John, it's quite separate from union endorsements and organizing and door knockers and phone call and phone banks. They have lots of other people who are volunteering. And they may not need the muscularity of the union movement to get up and run a sufficient and well-funded and well-organized get-out-the-vote effort. So at the margins, it could be important, but I don't think the Harris campaign is sweating it as much as it might have 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Major Garrett, so helpful as always. Thank you very much, Major. As a reminder, CBS News will host the only vice presidential debate between Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz on Tuesday, October 1st in New York. You can catch our live coverage on CBS and streaming on CBS News 24/7 and Paramount Plus.